There's a point where this is the logical conclusion of making everyone believe they need to have their own personal story affirmed in every product they consume. It builds an unhealthy relationship and makes you think that you're not okay if the fictional representations that you engage with don't tell your own sad, mediocre story back to you. This isn't just a review of Barbie, but a discussion about what the hell the movie is even trying to say. If you saw this movie, you might have had fun trying to get the messaging out of it, like my dog has fun trying to get peanut butter out of his Kong toy. Or you might have just had a stroke. Now, it's odd that I'm finding myself spend this much time on the movie because I don't think it was meant to be such a memento level thinker, but here we are. Am I giving too much credit to the writers? Maybe. Let's go. First question we have to answer is, what even is Barbie? Is she a blank slate for young girls to project themselves onto, or an actual character with agency and her own story arc? There are other named Barbie characters like her sister Skipper and Stacy, horrifying Midge, otherwise known as Pregnant Barbie, and Christy, an independently named Black Barbie. But there's also variants of the main Barbie, like Black Barbie named Black Barbie. There's actually an attempt at having Barbie be her own character throughout like the lore of the Barbie verse. She's supposedly named Barbara Millicent Roberts, a blonde-haired, blue-eyed girl named after the creator's daughter, who was supposedly born in the fictional town of Willows, Wisconsin. Ken also has a full name, Kenneth Sean Carson. I feel like I know this guy and I don't like him. Now, I'm being obnoxious over this for a reason. When I see a story like this and there's this much break or inconsistency in canon, it's just obvious that a committee of corporate goons made it up as they went over the entire duration of the character, which for Barbie is many decades. So no one really knows what she's supposed to be in real life, but specifically in this movie. Now, the adult response is, it's a toy. Who cares? And you would be right in saying that, but in discussing this film, it's using Barbie's history as a representative figure to drive the plot. It's a platform off of which to position the messaging, and the movie is dripping with on-the-nose messaging. All the while, Barbie herself is also an autonomous character, kind of sometimes. This movie uses a literal story mechanic where Barbie is tethered to the girl who is playing with her, feeling what she's feeling, thinking what she's thinking, but her awakening through the story as she deals with Ken and the patriarchy is also independent from anything her, I don't know what you would call her spirit human is going through. And given that the whole movie is one big allegory, our takeaways from each interaction through the movie are going to be wildly different depending on how these details are actually supposed to lay. For instance, I have no fucking idea what to make of Ken or what the writers wanted us to think. Many people who've seen this movie see Ken as representing men at large, the way Barbie kind of represents women. This makes sense to a rational person who's trying to pick up on the rules of this world to figure out what the hell is going on.
What are the rules? What are the rules?
In a lot of ways, it obviously is. The film begins with saying Kens don't have a good day unless Barbie looks at them. And the big moral lesson at the end of the movie is that Ken should actually be his own man, separate from his fixation on Barbie. The film highlights clearly the tendency of men, or Kens, to be obnoxiously competitive for the attention of women, and that competitiveness and jealousy is the very tool that the Barbies use against them after Ken literally brings the patriarchy to Barbie world, thus influencing, no, the film actually says brainwashing, the other Barbies, which implies that either the patriarchy is awesome or that the Barbies are just stupid and have no agency. I think I'm supposed to see the men as needing an identity away from women. I don't think I'm supposed to see the patriarchy as a beach party where everybody's having a blast. But anyways, Ken is heavily used to make commentary on men throughout the movie. But that's a problem because if you care about Ken as a character or the men that he represents, you see that he's mistreated and you take this movie an entirely different way. Now, the question of what is Barbie and the land that she lives in has a massive impact on how we interpret all of this. One, it could be a fantasy world created by whatever little girl is engaging with her. And I'm assuming this whole world would be for one girl, as there is only one of each Barbie, and stereotypical Barbie, who's Margot Robbie, is tethered to one girl. Am I overthinking this? So in that way, Barbie represents a childlike ideal of what the doll is supposed to be. Smart, independent, fashionable, and capable of anything. But with experience, maturity, and growth, that world would then change as the girl's perspective of Barbie changes. Two, Barbie Land could be a world that represents what women really are or should be in the mind of the writers, a kind of Plato's realm of forms, where Barbie Land is some ideal to promote and for women to strive for. If this is the case, we can interpret Barbie's position of influence, positive relationship with other Barbies, carefree, independent lifestyle and take it or leave it attitude towards Ken as some correct ideal that represents what the writers actually believe about women. 3, it could be the same realm of forms, but not to mirror the writer's belief that Barbie Land is actually a cool utopia where girls rule and boys drool, which would kind of make them psychopaths. But because Mattel made this world through marketing to women, and the writers are now commenting on that. Remember the opening scene where the girls are influenced only by baby dolls, only to have it be replaced by a 30-foot tall Barbie. Well, maybe Barbie Land is the story Mattel created to entice young girls, and Barbie's evolution is reconciling that with real life. We are at several levels of meta here. 4, it could be a fun parallel world like Elf, where you just aren't supposed to overthink it, but just enjoy the jokes and take the messages at face value. 5, it could be a convoluted mess that bounces between all of these, making the true message a mystery and allowing fans to connect dots at will and see in it what they want. This is the most compelling answer, in my opinion. Seriously, Shoe-on-Head's take that this is actually an anti-woke masterpiece accidentally is more compelling than whatever message the writers obviously intended for this movie. That anti-woke perspective, where it's actually a pro-Ken movie, makes sense when you recognize that Ken is mistreated horrendously in Barbie Land. He's supposed to be her boyfriend, which was bizarre in the beginning when you realize she doesn't like him or give him attention. Kens don't have a good day unless Barbie looks at them, the narrator says early in the movie. That might have been intended to show a tragic reality of men in society who need to compete to obtain status, to stand out, and to get the attention of females. Or, if Barbie Land is nothing more than the thought process of a little girl playing with her dolls, it might just be a funny statement of how such girls think of boys, given that Barbie is the real star of the show in this girl's imagination. In this scenario, the mistreatment of Kens isn't so bad, and the joke mid-film where Margot Robbie laughs and says, "Kens are superfluous," isn't actually a snobby feminist poo-pooing the importance of men, but actually a joke tethered to the fact that little girls really do see Ken as an accessory to Barbie, who is and should be the star in their Playhouse production. It's worth pointing out that the narrator is an obviously older woman, which may suggest this is not actually a young girl's fantasy. But also the film shows reference to older women multiple times throughout the movie, which may be an attempt to connect what young girls think and experience when they're very small with the woman they eventually become and kind of point out that they aren't really different. At this point, I can't be sure if any of this is actually intentional. It's like the imaginary lore of hardcore Rick and Morty fans based on the Easter eggs from shit 5 seasons ago. But I'm so desperate to find a consistent allegorical thread, I can't let it go. It's like looking at a fucking Escher drawing, knowing that the physics are never going to make sense, but if I just look around the picture one more time, it will. Now, aside from the fun I'm having with this self-imposed torture, I don't think the movie is good for whatever it was actually trying to be. It was a total mess, jumping from irreverent, silly Will Ferrell type humor, which is where it was absolutely the strongest, to on-the-nose commentary, to contemplative indie drama, to kind of mom-daughter dramedy. Each element was used either too infrequently or too poorly to make this movie the cult classic it really should have been. I got absolute whiplash when Barbie had the moment with the old lady at the bus stop and said, "You're so beautiful." And she looked back and said, "I know." Like, what fucking movie did this turn into? It's like watching Step Brothers, and the scene from where they're fighting over the drum set switches over to American Beauty, where Wes Bentley is crying, watching a plastic bag float around in a circle in a parking lot.
Sometimes there's so much beauty.
Like, this scene didn't track for a character who just came out of a perfect fantasy world where no one understands what death or cellulite is, but it does track for Barbie just being a mouthpiece for whatever the writers believe. Do you see my pain here? Now, Barbie Land for the first half hour was fun, and the movie should have stayed there. Most of the jokes in that world stuck, even though they weren't knee slappers. Like, Kate McKinnon's weird Barbie got a chuckle out of me. Her physicality fits really well with the idea of a mutilated Barbie. The only silver lining of the character's time in the real world, though, was seeing Ken parade around and discover the patriarchy, insisting on gaining access to places just because he's a man. Regardless of the messaging, Ryan Gosling's oblivious but arrogant doofy face made this comedically satisfying. But everything else about Barbie meets real life was such a forced marriage, where the Barbie characters are at home in their light, silly world. America Ferrera's stressed out mom, Gloria, from the real world doesn't fit in any way, isn't funny, isn't compelling, and is tonally in such stark contrast to the movie, you just want her and her daughter to go away. Upon meeting Barbie, Gloria's daughter, Sasha, calls her a fascist, and she later calls her crazy and then corrects herself by saying, "Sorry, reality challenged." Okay, so poking fun at hyper-wokeism is fair game, And the writers in this way give me hope that I'm overreaching and I'm reading into it too much. That is, until Gloria gives one of the worst speeches I've ever heard about the plight of females in modern society, talking about how it's literally impossible to be a woman because you have to be perfect, but not too perfect.
I do it pretty much every day because if I don't, I will get called emotional or difficult or might just literally get murdered.
Or something like that. I don't know. It all happens as they're plotting to resubjugate a group of men who, in this fantasy world, were seen as superfluous second-class citizens. Now, another problem is whether Barbie is even a role model in the first place, or another unfair standard being perpetuated by, you guessed it, the patriarchy. Gloria begs the CEO from Mattel at the end of the movie for a plain, regular-ass Barbie because something like, we're tired sometimes, and that's okay. The need for a grown-ass woman to have sweatpants and DoorDash Barbie to make her feel better about not being an astronaut was fucking weird for like 9 reasons, and it represents a lot of the problems with the fixation on representation culture. There's a point where this is the logical conclusion of making everyone believe they need to have their own personal story affirmed in every product they consume. It builds an unhealthy relationship and makes you think that you're not okay if the fictional representations that you engage with don't tell your own sad, mediocre story back to you. Again, I don't think that this was supposed to be a takeaway I had, but just like Ken's arc, it's there all the same. So getting a consistent message involves walking a very specific path in this movie with Barbie and company, where sometimes her and Ken are a representation of like a realm of ideals. Sometimes they're placeholders for the self-concept of a little girl. Sometimes they are their own individual characters on their own path. Other times they're just representative husks for broader social commentary. Sometimes Ken matters, but mostly not. And it jumps scene to scene. So figuring it out, it's like that Squid Game episode where you had to guess which pane of glass to jump on. You have to kind of guess the rules in each scene if you want to take anything meaningful from it or get any insight into what you think the writers actually meant. That makes the plot mechanic of verbalizing the cognitive dissonance required for living in the patriarchy as a method of unbrainwashing the Barbies really ironic. Now, if this is the fantasy world of a young girl, Ken really is superfluous because a young girl should be able to be the star of her own show and play with the other accessory characters at will. But if it is a separate world unto itself where the characters have agency, then we should give a shit about Ken. And in that case, everyone here is awful. But the layering here is just so jagged and inconsistent that I don't know what to think. I'm not moved to root for Barbie because I don't know what's at stake in the end. And in a movie that started out charming and funny, I'm sure as shit not laughing at any of this. As an aside, I've been really sick of the whole cartoon characters come from their world into ours bit since I was a kid. Even at like 6 or 7, it cheapened the property to me to see characters from a world I would otherwise get lost in be put face to face with a representation of real life I knew couldn't coexist. It made it more fake to me. They did it with the Smurfs, Woody Woodpecker, Alvin and the Chipmunks, Enchanted, Garfield, Sonic, Space Jam. I know Roger Rabbit was a classic, but I said what I said. Honestly, that movie is probably why I'm so bitter at this trope. Seeing Roger Rabbit in theaters at 2 years old in 1988 is my earliest memory, scarred into my brain because Christopher Lloyd being flattened with a steamroller, then melted at the end of the movie, scared the shit out of me so much it prematurely forced the development of memories my brain was not ready to have. But when it comes to writing movies about cherished characters, writers just can't help but break the fourth wall. It's just like in 2000, everyone thought a good movie needed an M. Night Shyamalan twist. Today, good stories have to be ham-fisted meta-commentary. Characters equal representation, which means any story of a fictional pop culture icon has to be brought to the real world so we can look at it in the face, see up close the devastating effect it's had on us, gain valuable new perspective on life, and finally heal. So I have no answers. This was more catharsis for me for dealing with the trauma that was a Greta Gerwig adaptation. But for as much as I didn't enjoy the movie, I did dwell on this for several days and spent a few hours making this instead of working on other more important projects. So I guess the terrorists won. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Let me know what you think about any of this, what you thought about the movie. Leave it in the comments. Till next time, this is Bromley. I'll see you.